So we have a mixing of organisms in the fossil record all over the world that don't belong in the same rock strata or the same era of millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of years apart. So how do they get in the same rock bed? Creationism versus evolution. Worldwide flood equals a recent creation, and the reason for the rock strata and all of the organisms and fossils that we see around the world, creating that instantly instead of over hundreds of millions of years gradually. Uniformitarianism is not even evident in anything in the evolutionary rock strata, in the textbooks, in the reality. Let's take a look at this website and look for the mixing of organisms. R.D. Manuel and Insect Pompeii, Scientific Monthly. This kind of thing does not lend itself well to uniformitarian interpretation, but strongly suggests some sort of very unusual catastrophe or catastrophes. A lot of people try to throw this into recent or local floods, but the problem is there's too much water. If there's that much water to do one area, it's going to cover over the other because water seeks its own level. Other caves in the same region within 3 miles of Cumberland are barren of fossils. So something happened. This mixing of organisms, he says, from entirely different habitats and even different climatic regions in one great mass is characteristics of many most important fossil deposits. See, perhaps the only, it's all over. Perhaps the only place in the world more important for the study of fossils, insects, than the fluorescent shales already mentioned is in the famous Baltic amber deposits, where multitudes of insects and other organisms are preserved with an unsurpassed exquisiteness of detail. Dr. Hebert Nilsson, late director of the Swedish Botanical Institute and as familiar as anyone with these deposits, says concerning them, in the pieces of amber, which may reach a size of 5 kilos or more, especially insects and parts of flowers are preserved, even the most fragile structures. The insects are of modern types, and their geographical distribution can be ascertained. And it is then quite astounding to find that they belong to all regions of the earth, not only to the Paleoarctic region, as was to be expected. The geological and paleobiological facts concerning the layers of amber are impossible to understand unless the explanation is accepted that they are the final result of an alloctonous process. I'll have to look that up, how to pronounce it, including the whole earth. So all of this process is one which transports the materials to their final deposition locality, probably by flooding waters. It'd have to be worldwide if you see it all over the world. Nelson thus is saying that these deposits could not have been formed in the region where the organisms lived, but they must have been transported from there from great distances in a violent cataclysm of some sort that only a worldwide flood could do, and that no other explanation can account for the facts that they observed. He further describes the lignite beds of Geiseltal, Germany, as follows. Exactly the same picture as the one just given is offered by the well-known studies of certain fossil-carrying strata of the lignite in Geiseltal. Here, too, there is a complete mixture of plants and insects from all climatic zones and all recognized regions of the geography of plants and animals. Wow. It is further astonishing that in certain areas the leaves have been deposited and preserved in a fully fresh condition instantly. They didn't wait for years. The chlorophyll is so well preserved that it has been possible to recognize the alpha and beta types of chlorophyll. An extravagant fact comparable to the preservation of the chlorophyll was the occurrence of preserved soft parts of the insects, muscles, corium, epidermis, keratin, color stuffs as melanin and lopochrome, glands, and the contents of the intestines. Just as in the case of the chlorophyll, we are dealing with things that are easily destroyed, disintegrating in but a few days or hours. The incrustation must therefore have been very rapid, instantaneous. Dr. Newell, paleontologist, American Museum of Natural History. One of the most remarkable examples of preservation of organic tissues in antiseptic swamp waters is a fossil graveyard in Eocene lignite deposits of the Gleisel in central Germany. More than 6,000 remains of vertebrate animals and a great number of insects, mollusks, and plants were found in these deposits. The compressed remains of soft tissues of many of these animals show details of cellular structure, and some of the specimens had undergone but little chemical modification. Well preserved, bits of hair, feathers, and scales probably are among the oldest of the examples of essentially unmodified preservation of these structures. Well, the stomach contents of beetles, amphibia, fishes, birds, and mammals provided direct evidence about eating habits. Bacteria of two kinds were found in the excrement of crocodiles, and another was found on the trachea of a beetle. Fungi were identified on leaves, and the original plant pigments, chlorophyll and copropophin, were found preserved in some of the leaves. Newell, N.O. Newell, Adequacy of the Fossil Record. And he's writing in the Journal of Paleontology, that these, though striking, are not unique instances of fossil preservation, is substantiated also by Newell. Not unique. There are innumerable well-documented records of preservation of tissues of animals and plants in the so-called pre-quaternary rocks. It is inconceivable that deposits of this sort could be really due to normal slow processes. I mean, growing in place. Had to be from someplace else. That big word, autochthonos. Unusual transportation and rapid burial mechanisms are plainly indicated. The great numbers of fossils as entombed in the rocks are stressed repeatedly by Newell. For example, Robert Broom, the South African paleontologist, estimated that there are 800,000 million skeletons of vertebrate animals in the Karoo Formation. Just one formation. Henry S. Ladd, U.S. Geological Survey, describing beds of herring fossils in the Miocene shales of California. More than 1 billion fish, averaging 6 to 8 inches in length, died on 4 square miles of bay bottom. Wow. The examples cited are merely random samplings of phenomena which are found in great numbers of places all around the world. They are not by any means the most spectacular or impressive examples, but merely typical illustrations of what is quite commonly encountered in the fossiliferous deposits of the world. One might, for example, discuss at length such marvels as the La Brea pits in Los Angeles, which have yielded tons of thousands of specimens of all kinds of living and extinct animals, each of which, by the unbelievable uniformitarian explanation, fell into the sticky graveyard by accident one at a time. Really? The Sicilian hippopotamus beds, the fossils of which are so extensive that they are actually been mined as a source of commercial charcoal, the great mammal beds of the Rockies, the dinosaur beds of the Black Hills and the Rockies, as well as in the Gobi Desert, the astounding fish beds of the Scottish Devonian strata, and on and on and on. To attempt to account for these vast graveyards in terms of present-day processes and events, except via the most extreme and unscientific extrapolation, is absolutely impossible. And yet it is in deposits such as these that most of the fossils are found, on which is based much of the generally accepted uniformitarian scheme of historical geology. Fossils which are the preservation just the carbon. Carbonization meaning coal. This is the third day listed by Professor Miller whereby fossil remains can be preserved. The third way, having reference to the formation especially of coal, in which the hydrogen and oxygen largely disappear from the organic remains, leaving only the carbon, but often are also leaving the original structure beautifully preserved. The coal deposits of the world are, of course, tremendous in magnitude, with the exact amount quite uncertain, but somewhere around 7 trillion tons. About all we really know about coal reserves is that there appears to be lots of coal in the world. Instead of 7 trillion tons, there may be double that. On the other hand, there may be less than half that. Okay. We have Ayers and Scarlett, energy sources, the wealth of the world. Coal is the end product of the metamorphism of tremendous quantities of plant remains under the action of temperature, pressure, and evolutionists claim ages of time, but so far not. Coal has been found throughout the geologic column and in all parts of the world, even in Antarctica. Many coal fields contain great numbers of coal-bearing strata embedded with strata of other materials, each coal seam having a thickness which may vary from a few inches to several feet, and each foot of coal may represent many feet, just how many no one knows, of plant remains, so that the coal measures testify the former existence of almost unimaginably massive accumulations of buried plants. Coal geologists have long been divided into two camps. Those favoring the growth in place, this word, a theory of coal origin, and those favoring transportation and deposition theory, which is consistent with the Noahic flood. Consistent uniformitarianism, of course, tends to favor the former and attempts to picture the coal-forming growth in place theory process in terms of modern peat deposits forming under swamplands such as the Dismal Swamp of Virginia. The great thicknesses of the coal bed there is accounted for on this theory that by assuming a continuous subsistence, subsiding, a sinking of vegetation to the bottom of the land, more or less keeping up with the slow accumulation of plant remains, the interbedded strata of non-carbonaceous deposits, inorganic material, and are again explained by assuming alternating marine transgression, periodic local flooding, and resulting periods of sediment deposition. Well, here's a big complex explanation. How about just one catastrophic worldwide flood? But it has been well established that interbedding of this sort with many undisturbed and uniform demarcation seams cannot be attributed to sequential and long periods of time, which would erode and break up those seams, but rather to one short period of time, worldwide catastrophic flood. A wide variety of types of these intervening sediments have been noted in attempts made to explain them in terms of cyclotherms, or recurring cycles of deposition of different kinds of materials corresponding to the different stages of marine transgression and regression. If the autochthonous growth in place theory of coal bed is correct, it is testimony to quite a marvelous sequence of circumstances. One or two or three coal seams formed by alternate stages of swamp growth, peat accumulation, marine transgression, and emergence, etc., might be believable, but the assertions that the cycle is repeated scores of times in the same spot over a period of perhaps millions of years is not so easy to accept. Absurd. This theory, which is purportedly uniformitarian in essence, is actually anything but that, as there is no modern parallel for any of its major features. The peat bog theory constitutes a very weak attempt to identify a modern parallel, but will hardly suffice. There is no actual evidence that peat is now being transformed into coal anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, except for uniformist preconceptions, it would seem that the actual physical evidence of the coal bed strongly favors the theory that the plant accumulations have been washed into place. The coal seams are almost universally found in stratified deposits. The non-carbonation sediments intervening between the coal seams are always said to have been waterborne and deposited. The great thicknesses of some seams and the great numbers of seams in a given locality also constitute prima facie evidence of rapid and cyclic currents carrying and depositing heavy burdens of organic material. Space precludes further discussion of the questions of coal formation, although many more evidences could be marshaled in favor of the transportation and deposition theory, worldwide flood, such as the frequent splitting of coal seams into two or more independent seams, the many fossil trunks that have been found extending through two or more seams, the coal balls of matted and exceptionally well-preserved fossils, and the great boulders often found in coal beds, the frequent grading of coal seams into stratified layers of shale or other sedimentary rock, and so on and on and on. Worldwide flood with constant waves back and forth, currents depositing, slamming into each other, and going back and again, very short period of time, with a huge amount of water, fossilized, it's instantly coal. Regardless of the exact manner in which coal was formed, it is quite certain that there is nothing corresponding to it taking place in the world today. There is one of the most important of all types of geologic formations, this is, and one on which much of our supposed geologic history has been based. Nevertheless, the fundamental axiom of uniformitarianism, uniformity, that the present is the key to the past, completely fails to account for this phenomenon. Another amazing find was reported many years ago, that a fossilized human skull in the coal measures. The outstanding authority in coal geology, Otto Stutzer, says concerning this mysterious fossil, in the coal collection in the Mining Academy in Freiburg, Stutzer was professor of geology at middle school in the School of Mines of Freiburg in Saxony, There's a puzzling human skull composed of brown coal and manganese and iron, and phosphatic